Ryan's office revenge. Maybe it's time to let younger talent lead the technical direction. Linda Foster didn't even look up when she said it. Her eyes stayed glued to that compensation review document, pen hovering like my 22-year career was just another checkbox before lunch. I'm Bradley Wells, 50 years old, and I'd been keeping the lights on at Apex Financial Systems for 8 years. Before that, 14 years in the Navy maintaining nuclear reactor systems, because when something goes wrong at sea, there's no help desk to call. We were sitting in Conference Room B, the windowless one that smelled like burned coffee and corporate disappointment. You know the type: beige walls, motivational posters about teamwork, and a box of tissues nobody ever touches because showing emotion feels like career suicide in these places. Linda had scheduled this compensation review, confidential meeting for 9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. I knew what that meant. Nothing good ever comes from HR meetings marked confidential. She slid the paper across that cheap laminate table, her perfectly manicured nails catching the fluorescent light. "This is your adjusted compensation structure for fiscal year 2024. She said in that practiced HR voice they use when they're about to disappoint you. "You'll see your merit increase here." I looked down. Senior infrastructure engineer. 8 years. Merit increase, 3.2%. Below that, in smaller font, like they hoped I wouldn't read it, compensation aligned with departmental equity guidelines. I'd heard that phrase before. Corporate speak for, "We've decided what you're worth, and arguing won't change it." 3.2%, I said quietly. "Correct. That's within the standard range for senior technical contributors in your demographic. There it was, the polite way of saying old guy. I set the paper down and leaned back in that uncomfortable chair that was probably designed to make these meetings shorter. What about Jeffrey Stone? Linda's pen stopped moving for just a second. Then she forced that smile that never reaches the eyes. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Jeffrey Stone, the new operations director. Started 3 months ago. MBA from somewhere fancy. I saw his offer letter." The smile tightened. "I can't discuss another employee's compensation. He's making $168,000, I said. "Isn't he?" Linda put her pen down carefully, buying time to decide how honest she could afford to be. "Jeffrey has different qualifications," she said finally. "Like what?" "He has a master's in business administration from a top-tier program," she replied, sitting straighter like the credential gave her argument weight. "Plus fresh perspectives on digital transformation initiatives." "Fresh perspectives," I repeated slowly. From someone who's never seen a production system crash at 2 a.m., someone who doesn't know what a kernel panic looks like, someone who thinks legacy systems means anything older than his iPhone. Linda folded her hands on the table. Professional, controlled, unmoved. "Bradley, the industry is evolving. We need leaders who understand modern business frameworks, agile methodologies, cloud-first strategies. I rebuilt our entire monitoring infrastructure in 2019, I said. Designed the failover system that kept us online during the AWS outage when half our competitors went dark. Fixed the database corruption that would have cost us $4 million in client penalties. And we appreciate that," she recited. "But we also need to consider organizational dynamics, team chemistry, cultural fit, code for you're too old, and we want someone who looks good in company photos. Jeffrey has energy," Linda continued. "Enthusiasm. He brings innovative thinking to cross-functional initiatives. He brought innovative thinking to the backup verification process last month," I said. "Recommended we skip the monthly restore tests because they were redundant operational overhead." I had to explain why that was like removing the brakes from a car to improve gas mileage. "That's exactly what I mean," Linda said, and now her voice was cooling, resistance to change, clinging to outdated processes. Maybe it's time to let younger talent lead the technical direction and embrace transformation. Maybe it's time. There it was, not even dressed up anymore. The thing they'd been dancing around for months finally said out loud. I looked at her for a long moment. At that checklist. At the corporate language she was using like armor. Then I reached into my bag. Linda tensed slightly, like she thought I might pull out a lawsuit or a recording device. Instead, I took out a single folded piece of paper and placed it on top of her compensation document. Clean, white, already signed. Her eyes dropped to it, and I watched the color drain from her face as she read the header. Resignation letter, Bradley Wells, effective immediately. Bradley, she started, voice suddenly tight. I emailed a copy to your inbox at 9:47 a.m., I said calmly, along with CC to my manager and the VP of technology. She blinked at the signature, at the date, at words that couldn't be unsaid. You don't have to make this decision right now, she said quickly, professional mask slipping. This is a big step. Sleep on it. We can revisit the compensation numbers. I've been sleeping on it for 8 years, I said. This is me waking up. But you told me maybe it's time for younger talent, I said, standing. So here's your chance to find out what that looks like. I picked up my bag, left the resignation letter on the table, and walked out. By 9:55 a.m., my badge was deactivated. By 10 a.m., my system access was being revoked across 12 production environments. By 10:05 a.m., I'd cleared my desk, boxed up my external monitor and that coffee mug that said, I fix things you didn't know were broken, and walked past 3 engineers who suddenly found their screens very interesting. Here's what nobody knew about our payment processing system. What nobody bothered to learn because they thought legacy knowledge was outdated thinking. Every few months, the connection pool to the settlement database would exhaust silently. Not a hard failure, just slow degradation that looked like network latency or database performance issues. The monitoring would show elevated response times, but the error messages were misleading. Most people would restart the payment service, which would work for about 30 minutes before making everything worse. The fix was counterintuitive. You had to restart the settlement service first, wait exactly 3 minutes for the connection pool to reset, then restart payment processing in a specific sequence. I'd documented this in a Confluence page 3 years ago titled Payment System Recovery Procedures, Critical Read. The page had exactly 0 views except mine. I'd also set up monitoring alerts that would catch this pattern early, but the alert descriptions required someone who understood the system architecture. To everyone else, they just looked like generic performance warnings that could be ignored until the quarterly review. This wasn't negligence on my part. I'd tried to share this knowledge. I'd written runbooks, created documentation, even suggested we do knowledge transfer sessions. But every time I brought it up, management said we needed to focus on forward-looking initiatives instead of dwelling on legacy concerns. Jeffrey Stone had been particularly vocal about this during his first month. We need to move away from tribal knowledge, he'd said in a team meeting. Everything should be documented in our modern collaboration tools, not buried in someone's personal notes. I'd pointed out that I had documented everything. The problem was that nobody read documentation unless they were forced to. That's exactly the kind of outdated thinking we need to move past, Jeffrey replied. In agile environments, knowledge should be discoverable and democratized, not hoarded by individual contributors. Hoarded. Like 22 years of crisis response experience was something I was keeping to myself, out of spite. At 10:12 a.m., the first alarm started screaming. I was already home by then, sitting at my kitchen table filling out onboarding paperwork for Sterling Tech Solutions. The irony wasn't lost on me. A cybersecurity firm where the CTO was Dr. Michelle Rivera, a 58-year-old former IBM architect who'd built her reputation solving problems that shouldn't exist, but always do. My phone started buzzing. First a text from Russell Cooper, one of the senior engineers. "Dude, what happened? They just killed your access and now everything's on fire." Then another from Patrick Sullivan. "Payment system is throwing errors. You know anything about connection pool timeouts?" I did know. I knew exactly what was happening and exactly how to fix it. I also knew that they'd figure it out eventually, assuming they bothered to read the documentation I'd left behind. I typed back to Russell. "Check the Confluence page titled Payment System Recovery Procedures. Everything you need is there." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Can't find it. Can you just tell us?" "Search for Settlement Service Restart Sequence," I replied. "It's all documented." More dots. Searched everything. Nothing comes up. "Can you just walk us through it real quick?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I set the phone down and went back to my paperwork. At 10:21 a.m., every on-call engineer in the building was staring at cascading failures they'd never seen before and didn't know how to stop. Russell and Patrick were doing exactly what I would have done. Opening multiple terminal windows, tailing logs, looking for patterns. They could see the settlement service connections timing out slowly, which was triggering retry logic and making everything worse. But they didn't understand the underlying cause because they'd never encountered this specific failure mode before, and they couldn't find the documentation that explained it. My phone kept buzzing. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Texts from engineers asking if I could just hop on a quick call to help troubleshoot. Messages from people who'd barely spoken to me in months, suddenly very interested in my expertise. At 10:25 a.m., Jeffrey Stone walked into the operations center. "Why is the dashboard red?" he asked Russell. "We're investigating a payment processing issue," Russell said, not looking up from his terminal. "Investigating doesn't generate revenue," Jeffrey replied. "Can't we just restart everything and get back online?" Russell hesitated. "We tried restarting the payment service. It worked temporarily, then got worse. So restart it again." "That might make the problem worse," Patrick said from his workstation. "We need to understand the root cause." Jeffrey pulled out his phone. "How long will that take?" "I don't know," Russell admitted. "This is a pattern we haven't seen before." "Patterns?" Jeffrey said. "This is technology, not palm reading. There has to be a systematic approach to troubleshooting. What does the monitoring tell us?" "Connection timeouts to the settlement database," Patrick said. "But the database itself looks healthy." "Then it's obviously a network issue," Jeffrey said confidently. "Contact the network team." Russell and Patrick exchanged glances. The network team had already been contacted. They'd found nothing wrong. At 10:33 a.m., exactly 46 minutes after I'd signed that letter in Linda's office, someone knocked on my apartment door. Not polite knocking, urgent, desperate pounding. I looked through the peephole. Dennis Martinez, VP of Technology, usually pristine, now disheveled. Tie loose, hair messy, sweat on his forehead despite the cool October morning. I opened the door. "Bradley," he said, breathless. "Thank God you're here. We need you right now." "I don't work there anymore," I said. "I know, but—" He ran a hand through his hair. "The payment system is completely down. Russell and Patrick are trying, but they can't figure out what's wrong. You know these systems better than anyone. That's not my problem anymore." "We'll pay you," Dennis said quickly. "Consulting rate. Whatever you want. $300 an hour. It's not about money." "Then what?" I looked at him standing there in my doorway, this man who'd sat silent in meeting after meeting while Jeffrey dismissed my concerns as legacy thinking, and Linda talked about demographic alignment. "Respect," I said. which your company made very clear this morning it doesn't have for people like me. Dennis's face tightened. I wasn't in that meeting. I didn't know about the compensation discussion. But you knew Jeffrey was making twice what I make, I said. Everyone did. And nobody fixed it. So now you get to see what fresh perspectives and innovative thinking look like when the systems actually break. Clients are threatening to leave, he said. Then maybe you should have thought about that before letting HR tell me it was time for younger talent to lead. Is there anything I can say? Yes, I replied. You can say, we made a mistake, and we're going to learn from it. Then you can leave. I closed the door and locked it. Dennis knocked twice more, then left. I went back to my paperwork and let them learn. The outage lasted 11 hours. I didn't watch it happen in real time, but I heard about it later from engineers who were still willing to talk to me. Here's what went wrong. Back at the office, Russell saw the payment processing alerts and followed the standard runbook. Database connectivity. Green. Service health. Green. Queue depth. Manageable. But response times kept climbing, and error rates were spiking. He escalated to Patrick Sullivan, the other senior engineer. Patrick did what he'd seen me do dozens of times. Opened multiple terminal windows, tailed logs, looked for patterns. He could see the settlement service connections timing out slowly, which was triggering retry logic and making everything worse. But he didn't know about the connection pool exhaustion issue. That knowledge lived in my notebook and that unread Confluence page. At 10:45 a.m., Jeffrey Stone was back in the operations center with suggestions. Why don't we just scale horizontally? He asked. Spin up more payment service instances to handle the load. Russell looked up from his terminal. That might make it worse if it's a downstream bottleneck. Everything's scalable in the cloud, Jeffrey said confidently. That's the whole point of modern architecture. This isn't a capacity issue, Patrick said. It's something else. How do you know? Jeffrey asked. Have you run capacity testing? Load analysis? What does our monitoring data tell us about resource utilization? Patrick pulled up the monitoring dashboard. CPU usage was normal. Memory was fine. Network throughput was well below capacity. See? Jeffrey said. Classic underutilization. We just need more instance. Against their better judgment, Russell and Patrick spun up additional payment service instances. For about 20 minutes, it seemed to work. Error rates dropped. Response times improved. Then everything crashed harder than before. The additional instances had created more connections to the already exhausted settlement database pool. Instead of 3 timeouts per minute, they now had 15. The retry logic went into overdrive. The settlement service started refusing all connections. By noon, their primary payment processor, responsible for $15 million in annual revenue, sent an email with the subject line, Service interruption. Contract review required. By 1 p.m., CEO Amanda Torres was in the operations center, staring at a dashboard that looked like a Christmas tree of failed systems. Why can't we fix this? She asked. Because the person who built this system quit this morning, Dennis said quietly. Amanda's face went from concerned to furious in about 2 seconds. Why did he quit? Dennis glanced at Linda Foster, who had materialized in the room looking pale. Compensation issue, he said carefully. Fix it, Amanda said. Offer him whatever it takes. I tried, Dennis replied. He said no. Then offer more. It's not about money, Dennis said. It's about respect. And we just spent 8 years showing him we don't have any. The room went quiet. Amanda turned to the engineers huddled around their workstations. "Can you fix this without him?" Russell spoke up, voice tight with stress. "We're trying. But there are system behaviors Bradley documented that we can't locate. We can see what's happening, but we don't understand why." "How long?" Amanda asked. "Hours," Patrick admitted. "Maybe longer. We're basically reverse engineering our own system." "We don't have hours," Amanda said. "Every minute this is down, we're hemorrhaging money and credibility." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Bradley myself." My phone rang at 1:15 p.m. I looked at the caller ID. Amanda Torres, CEO. I let it go to voicemail. She called twice more. Both went unanswered. The voicemail was exactly what you'd expect. "Bradley, this is Amanda Torres. I understand there was an issue with your compensation this morning. I take full responsibility. Whatever you want, salary, title, equity, benefits, we'll make it happen. Please call me back. We need you." I listened to it once, then deleted it. Back at Apex, the crisis was escalating. By 3 p.m., they'd brought in an expensive consulting firm that specialized in emergency system recovery. The lead consultant spent 2 hours asking questions, examining logs, and finally admitted, without the original system architect, this could take days to fully understand and stabilize. Days? Amanda stared at him. "We can't be down for days. The documentation we can find is incomplete," the consultant explained. "There are undocumented dependencies, custom configurations, and institutional knowledge that appears to be missing. We can eventually recreate it, but not quickly." Jeffrey Stone, who'd been notably quiet since his scaling suggestion backfired, finally spoke up. "This is exactly why we need modern, self-documenting systems. Legacy architecture creates these single points of failure." Everyone in the room turned to look at him. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Jeffrey," Amanda said slowly, "you might want to save the system architecture lectures for after we're back online." By 4 p.m., 3 major clients had sent formal notices of potential contract termination. By 5 p.m., the stock price had dropped 12%. The board was asking questions Amanda didn't have good answers for. That's when Russell Cooper made one last desperate search through every documentation system, every shared drive, every archive. And finally, buried in the Confluence site archive, marked as outdated by Jeffrey's team during their documentation modernization initiative, he found it. Payment System Recovery Procedures. Critical Read by Bradley Wells. The page had been moved to the archive because Jeffrey's team decided it didn't follow their new documentation standards. Too technical, too detailed, not accessible to non-engineers. Russell opened it with shaking hands. The first line read, "If payment processor shows elevated response times with settlement service timeouts, do not restart payment service first. This will exhaust the connection pool further." He kept reading. Step-by-step instructions, exact timing, warning signs, recovery procedures. Everything they needed to know, written 3 years ago by the man they'd just forced out the door. Russell followed the procedures exactly. Restart settlement service first. Wait 3 minutes for connection pool reset. Restart payment processing in sequence. Monitor for stabilization. It worked. At 9:15 p.m., 11 hours after the first alarm, the systems stabilized. Error rates dropped to normal. Response times returned to baseline. The crisis was over, but the damage was done. The aftermath unfolded over the next 3 months. I didn't witness it directly, but word travels fast in the tech industry, especially when a mid-size fintech company nearly destroys itself in a single day. Week 1. 2 major clients formally terminated their contracts. Combined annual revenue loss, $22 million. Amanda Torres held an emergency board meeting. 3 executives were told to fix the retention problem immediately or find new jobs. Week 2. Jeffrey Stone was quietly moved to strategic planning initiatives. Corporate speak for a role where he can't break anything important. Linda Foster was let go during what they called organizational restructuring, but everyone knew why. Week 3. Dennis Martinez reached out via email. Professional, contrite, desperate. He offered $175,000 base salary, more than double my old pay. 25% annual bonus. Title bump to principal engineer. Reporting directly to him instead of through middle management. The email ended with, "I know we got this wrong. I'm asking for a chance to make it right." I read it twice, then responded, "I appreciate the offer, but I've already started at Sterling Tech. I'm happy here. I hope you find someone who can help you rebuild. Best of luck." Because by then, I was 3 weeks into my new job at Sterling Tech Solutions, and it was everything Apex Financial wasn't. The interview process had been refreshingly different. Dr. Michelle Rivera, the CTO, was a 58-year-old former IBM architect who'd built her career solving problems that shouldn't exist but always do. During our first conversation, she asked me one question that told me everything I needed to know. "What's the worst system failure you ever had to fix? And what did it teach you?" I told her about the payment processor incident from 3 years ago, the one I'd documented and nobody had read. She nodded slowly. "If you come here," she said, "that documentation won't sit in an archive. It'll be required reading. We take knowledge transfer seriously because we've learned the expensive way that smart people eventually leave. And when they do, we need the organization to remember what they knew." I accepted the offer that afternoon. My starting salary was $180,000, more than double what Apex had paid me. But more than that, I had respect. On my first day, Dr. Rivera introduced me to the engineering team. "This is Bradley. He's joining as principal infrastructure engineer. He's got more real crisis experience than most of us combined. When he tells you something about systems, listen. No qualifiers. No comments about demographics or cultural fit, just respect." Within 3 months, I'd modernized their monitoring infrastructure and trained 4 engineers to handle the critical incidents I used to manage alone. Not because I was trying to make myself replaceable, but because I was building something sustainable in an organization that valued sustainability. When my first annual review came up, Dr. Rivera called me into her office. "You've exceeded every expectation," she said. "We're bumping you to $195,000 base, and you're getting the full 25% bonus. Also, the board approved a retention package, another 15,000 stock options." I stared at her. "I haven't even been here a year." "Exactly," she replied. "We don't wait until people are walking out the door to recognize what they're worth. We do it while they're here and want to stay." 6 months later, I heard through industry contacts that Apex had commissioned an external audit of their engineering operations. The report found over-reliance on undocumented expertise, insufficient knowledge transfer processes, and compensation misalignment that created critical retention risks. The summary, which eventually leaked online, concluded, "The organization created a dangerous single point of failure by systematically undervaluing institutional knowledge. This represents a fundamental leadership failure with predictable financial consequences." Amanda Torres survived, but her bonus was cut by 40%. The board mandated diversity and inclusion training, with specific focus on age discrimination. Dennis Martinez quietly left for a startup 6 months later. 2 years after I left Apex, I got one final email from them. They wanted to hire me as a consultant, quarterly system reviews, knowledge transfer sessions, emergency response consulting. The proposed rate was $400 per hour. The contract was worth more than my entire final year salary at Apex. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds, then declined politely. Some lessons are too expensive to interrupt. As for Jeffrey Stone, I heard he landed at another fintech company as VP of Digital Operations. 6 months later, that company had a major outage during a modernization initiative he'd championed. He's currently between opportunities, as they say. Here's what companies like Apex never understand. When you push out the people who built your foundation, you're not just losing an employee. You're losing the living memory of every crisis, every shortcut, every patch that keeps your empire from collapsing. The young talent may be energetic and full of fresh ideas, but experience knows where all the critical vulnerabilities are buried. And when you decide that energy matters more than expertise, you get a very expensive education in what institutional knowledge actually means. The people who dismiss decades of experience as legacy thinking are usually the same people who've never had to fix something that was built before they were hired. They mistake unfamiliarity with irrelevance, assuming that anything they don't immediately understand must be outdated. But systems, like people, carry scars from battles fought long before the current team arrived. And those scars often contain the most important lessons of all. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's letting them prove themselves right, and watching them pay the full price for their education. Because, in the end, respect isn't something you can Google, and wisdom isn't something you can download from a cloud service. It's earned through years of keeping the lights on when everyone else has gone home.